Alrighty, the time has come. One of my most anticipated films of the year, Superman. I am outside the theater, seeing it at my press screening, and this is a film that comes with a lot of expectations for me, but I have learned to temper those expectations as the day has come upon myself. I'm going to leave all my baggage, my fandom of DC, been a lifelong fan, big fan of Superman, love James Gunn's work so far, love these actors, I've loved what I've seen from the promotion of the film. I'm going to leave that at the front door. I'm going to go in with an open mind. Now I can come out loving it, liking it, maybe not liking it. We'll see in a couple hours, but predictions, I am very confident in David Corenswet as Clark Kent and Superman. Big fan of Rachel Brosnahan. I think she's going to be one of the best Lois Lane's interpretations we've seen. I think, though, Nicholas Hoult's Lex Luthor and I think Miss Terrific are going to steal the film. Those are my early predictions. And again, I am excited. I am nervous. I am hopeful because I really want the DC universe to get its due. It's been a while, man. We've had some good films over the decades, but we haven't had a consistent universe. So I hope that this is the start of something beautiful. We'll see. I will see you all on the other side with my full review of Superman. Fingers crossed. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I've seen it. I have seen Superman. This will be a part 1 of a part 2 review. As you all saw, my previous intro came in with my baggage, but like I said, I want to leave at the front door and just take the film in for what it is. And again, more thoughts as I sleep on it. But as I stand right now, as I'm recording this, I'm a bit mixed on this film. I think the things that work really work. Like I think what we know from James Gunn, his sensibilities as a director, his style, the way he approaches stories and his characters, and the heart that he carries through a lot of his narratives, mostly find its way in this film for better, but also worse at times. I'll dive more into that in the second half of this video. I like the performances for the most part. Like I think David is a solid Superman. I don't know if I'm entirely bought into his version of the character. I thought Lois Lane, Rachel did a really solid job. I like Mr. Terrific. The supporting cast for the most part, like Guy Gardner, played by Nathan Fillion, kind of is that one fundamental James Gunn character that just has to be funny all the time, and that's a thing too. One of my biggest issues with, and I love James. I love his style, his sensibilities, his tone, but tonally speaking, this film is just almost too campy for my sensibilities. I really felt the cartoonist Saturday morning Justice League Unlimited Superman vibes, which can be fun, but for 2 hours it kind of weighs on you. And one of my fears going into this was like the James Gunn of it all. Will he put too much of his comedy? Will he put too much of himself in his film when you're the writer, director, producer, DC, co-CEO, and no one can tell you, don't do that, James. You're leaning too far into that. I think that's an issue here, that James just didn't have the reins to pull him in to really steer the ship for me. Again, I'm going to sleep on it to think about it a little bit more, to articulate my thoughts with more detail. But like I said, for me, it's a mixed bag. I feel like audiences will accept some of the tonal things that we have, the more campiness. It is a more kid-friendly Superman, which I know a lot of people want it. But then I think, I don't really care. I'm a critic. I don't really care what the critics have to say about it. But I think audience will be mixed on it too, but we'll see. Who knows? But for me, as I'm recording this right now, I'm very much mixed on this film. It's not terrible. It's not great. There's good points, good moments, but there's also some really scratch your head. Like we're really going that route. We're really changing the fundamental elements of certain elements of Superman, and also this is all you're getting raw thoughts right now. Again, I'm gonna sleep on this and come with a little bit more articulate details tomorrow when I sit down and write some stuff down. But right now, like I said, I am definitely mixed on it. But we're gonna sleep on it. We're gonna sit down with some thoughts, and I'm gonna give you my second half tomorrow, but by the time you see this, it'll be right now.
And we are back. Look, man, something I've learned the older I got, when I'm a little bit on the fence about something, whether it's movies or just things in life, sometimes you got to step back. Sometimes you got to recalibrate. Sometimes you got to write down some notes and just kind of really do a better job at articulating yourself. And that's what we're going to do in this second portion of the video. So picking up where I left off in that first portion, as I was saying, I'm a James Gunn fan, whether it's Guardians 1, 2, and 3, what he did with the Suicide Squad, what he did with Peacemaker. Those are all things I love, but when it comes to Superman, and as I thought about it last night and as I'm talking to you all now, this one just hit a little different. As you all saw from the first portion of the video, and if you saw my out of theater reaction, I walked out of the theater a little bit disoriented, right? But again, in this portion of the video, we're going to be talking about the things that I enjoyed. It's not all kryptonite. It's not all bad. We're going to talk about the good, the not so good, and everything in between. So let's start off with the positives, because there's a lot of things I liked here. For starters, this movie is not afraid to embrace the comic book elements to the max. If you love the wild, colorful side of comics, this movie just throws you right into the mix with little to no breaks. It's vibrant, visually stunning at times, and the blend of the score. We have the new elements of the score mixed in with the classic John Williams, and I really like what they did with that. It really brings the feels to the classic kind of Dahmer, Christopher Reeves vibes in with the new mix, and I really enjoy what they did with the soundtrack, even though the soundtrack isn't as prominent as we're used to in James Gunn films, but again, he focused more on the score, and I really like the compositions they had with the score with this movie. All right, now switching gears and talking a little bit more in depth about the performances. Now, I want to talk more about David Corenswet, which, funny enough, if you all have been on my YouTube journey for a while, I talked about David, it feels like almost a decade ago, but no, I think it was like maybe 3.5, 4 years ago. It was a show on Netflix, Ryan Murphy's Hollywood, and I talked about it in that review. You can go back in the catalog. I said that could be Superman one day, and here we are in 2025. So, talking a little bit more about David Corenswet as Superman. For the most part, I thought he was really solid in the role. He absolutely, without a doubt, looks the part. But more than that, he genuinely carries a huge sense of hope and joy, and I really like that about his character. He's almost like this boyish, sweet Superman who, I'm going to be honest with you all, he gets his ass kicked a lot in this film, but with all that ass kicking that he takes, I appreciate that he constantly always gets up and never gives up. As I kind of alluded to in my out of the reaction, this version of Superman, more so than like the comics, because I haven't read a ton of Superman comics, but I mostly grew up with the character in animated form and also 78 Superman. This felt like the cartoon version that I saw growing up as a kid. This felt like Superman from Justice League Unlimited, but it also has some elements of Sam Raimi's Spider-Man, where this is a hero who's physically beaten in this film quite a few times, but again, it's his resilience, it's his hopeful nature. He never gives up. He's always wanting to save everybody, no matter the circumstances, and not just people, animals too. And I really dug that, because it reminds me, again, going back to Dahmer's Superman, Christopher Reeve's Superman, saving a cat out of a tree. We don't get a cat that he saves in this film, a couple dogs, who we'll talk about, a particular dog here in a second, but he also saves other animals. And I really like that element about seeing how Superman, no matter the circumstance, will always want to save lives. Now, switching gears and talking about Rachel Brosnahan, who I'm a big fan of, as she plays the iconic Lois Lane, who I gotta say, I enjoyed her character. I enjoyed her performance also. She has this confidence to her, not only as an individual character within this narrative, and she handles her own business and has her kind of her own subplot in figuring out what's going on with Lex Luthor in this movie, but she's also very confident in her journalism skills, and I like that they highlight that about her. Like, that's her superpower, is figuring things out, diving deeper, getting those answers, and I really like what Rachel brings to the character. And I'm really excited to see her in the mix of the DCU, interacting with other characters, but I thought Rachel did a really good job, and I'm really excited to see more of her character. But now switching gears and talking about who I thought was one of the standout characters in this film, and that is Edi Gathegi, I think I'm pronouncing that right, as Mr. Terrific. I'm a fan of his work. I've always felt so bad for him. There was a movie he was in that I'm a big fan of, another superhero movie by the name of X-Men First Class. Matthew Vaughn did his thing with that movie, but what he did to Eddie's character in that film is a crime. So he got his payback with Mr. Terrific, and pun intended, he is terrific in this film. Like, I haven't read many Mr. Terrific comics, but I always love seeing his, like, when he's on the cover of comics, like, that is a bad MFer. I've seen him in animated movies and shows, and I saw like clips of him in the Arrowverse, which I didn't really, after a while I gave up on that universe, but every time I saw him, like, that character looks so cool. He is such a, like, he reminds me of, like, he has the intellect of, like, Bruce Wayne, and he has, great hand-to-hand combat skills, but he's not, like, a metahuman. I always love that about the character, and I love, like, his style, his aesthetic, his spheres, all this stuff. He's just a cool-ass character. And all that stuff I love growing up about the character is in this film tenfold. Like, he is a standout. He's the best Justice gang member for me, and I'm really excited to see more of him because he, like I said, is a bad A. Watch my mouth. I really like the character. I thought he was fantastic, or should I say terrific, in this movie. But now, talking about the big bad, we got kaiju monsters, we got the Engineer, we got Ultraman, and other different various villains, but they're all being backed by the one and only, one of the most iconic villains, not only in DC, but Marvel, one of the best villains of all time, if you ask me, and that is Lex Luthor, being played by Nicholas Hoult. Listen, man, he is ripped straight from the comics. They really lean into the pettiness of the character, which I like growing up, and his total hate for Superman, stealing all the attention away from him, is classic Lex, and I am such a fan of Nicholas Hoult. And if you know, in the last 5 or 7 years, he auditioned for Robert Pattinson's Batman. He auditioned for David Corenswet's Superman. He also was supposed to be in Mission Impossible, but he's always missed the mark. Now, granted, he was Beast. He was, obviously in Furiosa. Like, he is a great actor. He's had a great career. But I am so glad to see him as Lex Luthor, and I really enjoyed. I wish they would have leaned a little bit more into the menacing side of Lex, which they do at times. They wish they would have did a little bit more and dive a little bit deeper into that side of the character. But nonetheless, I like what they did with Lex in this film. I'm super excited to see when we see him again and how he gets into the mix with other heroes, but also villains in the DC universe. But again, I'm really excited to see Nick get his opportunity to shine, and I thought he was definitely a villain worth talking about. Also, too, worth talking about as a dog lover, my dog is literally right there looking at me as I'm recording this. I gotta talk about Krypto. I won't give too much away. I was a little bit nervous about Krypto because I'm not the biggest Krypto fan from comics and animated shows. It just does, even though I'm a dog lover, but I like Krypto. And I think if you are a fan of Krypto, you will like how he's used in this film as well. Now, I do want to backtrack a little bit and talk about the dynamic between Lois Lane and Clark Kent, aka Superman. I like their screen presence. I like their chemistry. They're at a point in this film in their relationship where the honeymoon phase is kind of fading off a little bit. They're at disagreement on how Superman is so like in the moment, where she like, let's sit back and reevaluate certain things. There's consequences to your action. I like their dynamic. I wanted more of them on screen together, which hints at a point I'm going to talk about here in a second. But when they are on screen, there's magic, there's chemistry. I'm excited to see the relationship continue to grow. But going back to a little bit of what I was mentioning about wanting more of them, also wanting a little bit more of Clark Kent. As the title alludes to, Superman, this is much more of you see Superman a lot and not so much of Clark Kent. It reminded me of Matt Reeves' The Batman, where we got Robert Pattinson in the suit more. I'm not complaining about that, seeing our heroes be heroes, but I wanted more of Clark, and hopefully we get that in the future. But again, I like Lois, I like Clark, I like their dynamic. I'm excited to see more, but I definitely want to mention that as well. Now, let's get into the things that I was mixed on, things that I have criticisms with, and things that just didn't flat out work for me in this film. Now, this is where my love for James Gunn's previous work really clashes for me with this narrative. Now, I'm going to play you all a clip here in a second about James Gunn, what his intentions was with this film. I really enjoy how much he leans into the comic book elements of this film, and as I say that, check out this clip.
I have them all, but I really am from the comics, So for me, this is the most comic book movie I've ever made by far. Maybe the first real comic book movie I've made, because I really am influenced by the comics, and I wanted to have people experience the joy I felt when I was reading comic books as a kid in this movie.
And look, I appreciate that he embraces that, because growing up in the 90s, there were so many comic book films growing up. Number one, there weren't a ton of them, but when we got them, even thinking of the classics, the X-Men's of the world or what have you, Fantastic Fours of the world, they were so scared to lean into the comic book elements. And obviously, as we've progressed, we've gotten more of these comic booky type of films. And this is, like I said, a really comic book centric movie. But at the same time, all the different things that we see James Gunn throw into the mix, the comics, the animated shows, what's come before, it kind of makes this film feel like a mess. Narratively, for me, as well as tonally, I think that James Gunn takes what I love about Suicide Squad, as well as what I love about the Guardians of the Galaxy, and the things that he takes from those elements, like this film is fun, this film is colorful, like I mentioned earlier, this film has entertaining moments. It is never a boring moment in this film, but like I said, it just feels messy. One of my major issues for me was the recycled thematic elements. Again, going back to what he does with Guardians, it's an underdog story. It's same thing with the Suicide Squad, same thing with Peacemaker. You root for those characters, but here, that element didn't really stick to landing for me. Again, Guardians, Suicide Squad, Peacemaker, it works for those type of characters, but here it just felt a bit off. It does capture the empowering, hopeful spirit from the comics, but again, it felt like tonally he was clashing within himself. And James Gunn has even said it himself, I talked about it earlier, he leans heavily on soundtracks in those previous projects I mentioned, but here he leaned more into the score. He leans more into the messiness of the characters and the dysfunctional nature of the characters. And here it feels like, again, he's like, I want to make sure you all know that my Superman is hopeful. He saves squirrels. He saves everybody. It just, I feel like he's clashing against himself. And not saying that he doesn't have that in him, but you can tell that he's not as comfortable with certain moments from Superman mixed in with like his cynical nature. Like he's battling with himself in this film. And I think it shows in the screenplay that he wrote, but also what we see on screen. Something else I want to talk about, as I mentioned, the screenplay. I think that's the kryptonite for me in this film because the way the story is structured, I don't feel like there's a central story at the heart of the film. To me, it felt like there were more of series of events leading into the next, and while there are memorable scenes within those moments, again, the script to me is the kryptonite of this movie. Also, I got to talk about the campiness in this film. It's a bit jarring at times, especially when it's overshadowing the more serious elements, which was something I was nervous about. I like James' comedy. Obviously, comedy is very subjective, but I like the way he mixes in his comedy with the right characters. And there are characters in this narrative, Guy Gardner, Jimmy Olsen, and other characters, but sometimes I just feel like everyone, they're like passing the mic to each other, like, all right, you get a joke, and sometimes it takes away from some of the seriousness, which again, I like that James Gunn isn't overly serious, but I'm like, the tone is off, and also, again, I just feel like he couldn't find a balance like he does in some of his other works. Again, I can't state this enough. This film is ambitious. This film throws you right into the mix, which can work at points, but also it can be a little bit too much at times for a solo first outing for a Superman film in this DCU. Which, to that point, I got to talk about the pacing of the film. It moves at a very fast pace, which I'm not mad at, but sometimes I'm like, can we sit in this scene for a little bit longer? Can we explore these characters a little bit further? Can we flesh things out? Can we develop things a little bit more? But again, this film was like boom, boom, boom. Like you thought this was The Flash. Like this movie is running at 100 miles per hour. Which, speaking of The Flash, who's not in this film, by the way, but just speaking to like the Justice League of it all, or should I say the Justice Gang that they introduced in this film, I talked about Mr. Terrific, but I haven't really talked about Guy Gardner, who I'm indifferent about. I didn't not like the character, but I didn't love the character or necessarily like the character. And I'm in the middle. He has to grow on me. And that's kind of intentional. If you know Guy Gardner from the comics, he's not a likable character. So I'm indifferent. But I will say Hawk Girl, who I'm a big fan of, Isabela Merced, who's having a hell of a run right now in her career. Big fan of her work. But Hawk Girl really didn't do much for me in this film because she really wasn't given much to do, unfortunately. She's just kind of there. And honestly, going back to my Guardians comparison, she reminded me of like Teenage Groot, where like she didn't want to be there. She's kind of mopey and she just screams a lot. Now, getting back to some other characters, besides Lois Lane, the Daily Planet to me was like being marketed as like, oh, we're going to get a lot of Daily Planet. Not so much. They are quite underwhelming as well. Perry and all the other characters, even Jimmy Olsen, who I like Jimmy from the comics and different iterations, but the Jimmy here, nothing against Skyler, I like him as an actor, but there's something they do with Jimmy, which I thought was a very James Gunn thing to do. There's a running joke in this film about him being a ladies' man, which it's funny, but it kept going on and on and on, and it got to the point where it was like an actual like pivotal part of the story, which I thought was really ridiculous. And another character that I can't forget to mention who works with Lex Luthor in this film, and that is the engineer, who I also thought was quite underwhelming. Very cool looking. I like her skill set. I like that she is introduced in this film to potentially get to the Authority, which she's one of the leaders of. But like Hawk Girl, she is underwhelming, and she really felt more like a plot device more than an actual character. Which brings me to a couple more characters before we wrap things up. I gotta talk about Ultraman for a little bit. I won't get into the certain things that the film has to do with the character, but it did remind me of like Black Noir for my boys fans out there. But I will say there is something with Ultraman that if you know the comics, it's kind of predictable, even on the film tries to make a surprise. I guess it'll be surprising for people that's not familiar with the character. But again, I feel like similar to Hawk Girl, Engineer, and also Metamorpho, who shout out to Anthony Carrigan, shout out to NoHo Hank. Another character where I feel like those characters I just mentioned are more plot devices than they are actual characters. Now, I'm excited to see more of them, but I just feel like the way they were used in this film was just underwhelming. And a couple more points I want to mention. This is more in kind of the nitpicky side of my criticisms. I'm a DC fan, as I've said 1,000 times at this point. But one of the things that I love about DC that separates it from like Marvel, and this isn't a Marvel versus DC conversation, but one of the things I love about DC is where our heroes call home, right? The cities they come from, the planets they come from, they're very distinct. They're characters within itself, right? I talked about Matt Reeves' Batman earlier, like how Gotham City is a character in that film. Metropolis isn't really unique in this movie. It doesn't have a personality. It didn't have much flair, which I feel like was missing because, again, whether it be Star City, Bloodhaven, Gotham City, and other places that I love within the DC universe, the Metropolis here is just kind of there. And again, I just wish it had more personality to it. Now, something I want to go back on, talking a little bit more about Lex Luthor. Again, I like that he's 10 steps ahead of Superman in this film. But when it comes to the way he structures his plans in this movie, it did feel a little childish at points, but also goofy, especially this particular moment where he's using these online tactics to take down Superman. And to me, this is where, I don't want to say the ego, but this is where the James Gunn being like online way too much came into play in this script, because to me, this little subplot of how Luthor's using online hate to take down Superman, to me felt like meta James Gunn injecting his personal feelings on like how he gets online banter and his haters. I feel like he injected a little bit too much of himself with that subplot. And finally, this might be the more controversial side of my negatives and more of a definite thing I did not like, and that is Clark's parents, but also his Kryptonian parents. Now, to the Clark human side, which I liked about this story, but to that side of the story, I didn't really jive well with the performances that we got from his parents. And they're not in it a lot. And they do something kind of different that we haven't really seen in live action with his parents, which I'm excited to see where it goes. But I just didn't really get the emotional weight from the parents like the film intended it to be. Which brings me to his Kryptonian parents, who I won't get too deep into who's cast in the role and how much they're in the film. But there's something that they do fundamentally to his Kryptonian heritage that I'm not a fan of. It fundamentally changes his Kryptonian relationship, and I'm curious to see if they explore the change they do. But as of right now, again, things can change if they expand upon it more. But I didn't like what they did with his biological parents. It didn't really work for me at all in this narrative. And last thing I want to mention, as a lifelong DC fan, how do I feel about this film as it being the first DC film? Obviously, we got Creature Commandos, and you can count the Penguin being into the mix. But as far as films go, this is the first DCU film. I wouldn't say I'm nervous, as I'm wearing my Batman shirt, but there is some things that I'm not all the way 10 toes down confident with James Gunn and being a CEO, co-CEO with Peter Safran. And I am excited to see other people get their hands in the mix, a la Greg Gillespie for Supergirl, what we're getting with the Lantern Show and Clayface next year. But we got one more James project coming out next month, which is Peacemaker. What I'm getting at is we go from Creature Commandos, we go to Superman, into Peacemaker. I think I need a break from James Gunn, his style, his sensibilities, because I don't want to say nervous as I talk about Batman, but I am excited to see what they do with other creators getting their hands in the mix, because like I said, based on certain things, I think James is so beholden to his style and the way he crafts his stories that I just need a break. That's where I'm getting at when it comes to that. And also, I will mention Creature Commandos here. I don't really know if the carry over the baton from Creature Commandos. I'm referring to Rick Flag, which isn't a spoiler. Frank Grillo is in Superman. If you saw Creature Commandos, where Rick Flag Sr. ends in that show and where we find him in Superman, I don't know if the creative tissue and the connective tissue is as cohesive. And I'm not talking about the look. I already know why he has gray hair in an animated show and he has black hair in the movie. But I'm talking about where we see him from one project to the next. It didn't really add up. Hopefully they explore more in Peacemaker, but again, the connective tissues from one product to the next just didn't really add up to me personally. So we have come to the end. Now, before I get into my final thoughts and my score of this film, as you all can see, I'm not as mixed as I was last night, but it's still a complicated feeling I have for the film. I am excited to watch it another time to really kind of iron out my thoughts. But before we get into that portion of the video, I do want to take the time to thank you all for making it to this point in the video. If you've enjoyed my commentary this far, do me a favor, man. Hit that like button. Consider sharing this video to anyone and everyone you know that's interested in talking about Superman. And if you're new to the channel, consider subscribing. I'm also going to put this in podcast, so consider following my podcast. So with all that being said, overall, for every vibrant visual and heartfelt performance, there is a muddled plot point or an undeveloped character within the mix of this film, Superman. What worked for some of James' previous work in terms of the ensemble dynamics and the rapid fire introductions didn't quite work for me here in this narrative, which again makes me slightly doubtful for the Gunn of it all when it pertains to the larger picture of the DCU, at least in this initial outing. Now, while this film certainly captures moments of the empowering, hopeful spirit of Superman, the execution of this film left me wondering if a little less of everything might have been a lot more something truly great. I walked out of this film feeling entertained, yet also disjointed. With all that being said, I lean more towards being mixed positive, and as I am speaking to you all right now, I'm going to give Superman a solid 3 out of 5. So a 3 out of 5 I think is a solid film. To me, a 3 out of 5 is like right in the middle for my ranking personally. I didn't love this movie. I didn't hate this movie. I don't think it's a terrible film. I don't think it's a masterpiece of a film. I think it's right in the middle. Like I said, 3 out of 5. Now, I do plan on rewatching this film, hopefully sooner rather than later. I don't see it going much lower than where I'm standing right now, but I could see it going up just a little bit. I don't see this film being like, again, it's gonna grow on me. I don't know if I ever see myself loving this movie because it is quite messy at times. But as I'm talking to you all right now, 3 out of 5, which to me is a good movie. That's my thoughts on Superman. A lot to say there, and I might have another video in the mix regarding like get into the nitty gritty, get into the spoilers. So depending on how this video does and how you all interact with it, we might just do a spoiler discussion, but we'll see how this does in the coming days. But thank you all again for clicking on the video, hearing my thoughts, and you notice something too. Before we wrap up, I didn't really dive too much into the comparison game, talking about previous Supermans, previous directors, and iterations or what have you. I say all that to say, go into this film, leave your baggage at the front door. And I think that's going to help you with the experience. And I know for some people that's going to be hard to do, but I'm not really talking to those people that are just 10 toes down with a particular past iteration of the character. But with all that being said, this is going to be an interesting week. I think some people, like I said last night, are either going to love this movie a lot with every ounce of them, or they're going to hate this movie. But like I said, hopefully the nuance, like myself, you can find that in between and have some interactions and some great discussions about this film. So we'll see. One can only hope. But anyway, thank you all again for watching this video. Thank you all for supporting the channel if you've been a part of the channel for a while, or if you're new to the community. I appreciate y'all. I'm really looking forward to the DCU and hopefully a bright future for the franchise that I've loved near and dear to my heart. But we've been talking a lot. We've been yapping a lot. Let's wrap this thing up. Again, if you're watching this on YouTube, like, share, comment, consider subscribing. If you're listening to this in podcast form, leave a comment. Consider following the podcast. Thank you all. Stay safe. Remember, you're awesome. And I'll catch you all on the next video.